Hi, everyone. We'll start at the top of the hour. We're just going to show some responses that ABC supporters have shared in response to the prompt, because birds. And so these are reasons why people care and support birds. Hi, everyone. I'm Jordan Rudder, Director of Public Relations at American Bird Conservancy. What you were seeing just now were some responses from ABC supporters about why birds matter to them and why they care so much about the birds that unite us. Today, the webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. We'll be putting the links referenced in the chat, but in case you missed them or can't copy them down fast enough, please know that everything can be found in a follow-up email we'll send of registrants and on our website. Please submit any questions you have during the presentations using the Q&A box, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can during the Q&A portion at the end of the presentations. Automated captions are available for this webinar, and you can turn them on by clicking on the up arrow next to the CC icon, then click Show Subtitles, and you can drag those anywhere you want on the screen. Please note that our system is set to English, and we are aware that this is a limitation, and apologize for any errors that it might introduce to the captions during the webinar. Before we begin, I wanted to share some background about American Bird Conservancy, shortened to ABC, which was founded in 1994 with the mission of protecting wild birds across the Americas. We continue that work today following a conservation strategy outlined by the pyramid featured on the current slide. Our work strives to help keep common birds common and prevent the rarest species from going extinct. Species and groups of birds have rebounded in the past decades, but it doesn't happen without people like you who care about birds. So thank you so much again for joining us today. And the world needs birds. And as you'll learn in this webinar, in case you didn't know already, birds benefit the world in many surprising ways, but they also need our help now. Sadly, more than half of all bird species in the Americas are suffering population declines. And as we move through this webinar, we hope you consider giving back and supporting birds via becausebirds.org. Every dollar raised starting right now today will count towards a newly launched 2-to-1 match to raise $100,000 for birds before midnight on Giving Tuesday, which is just a couple weeks away on November 29th. For every gift of $20 or more before then, We at ABC will also plant at least 2 native trees in important bird habitat, such as areas protected by our bird reserve network. So thank you so much for considering, and we're really grateful for your support of birds and ABC. But without further ado, let me introduce you to our speakers today. First up, we have Andrés Anchondo, who is the Associate Director of Impact Investing in Latin America and the Caribbean, working to protect migratory birds and their wintering habitats. Before joining ABC, Andrés worked with NRDC's Latin America project, researching mechanisms to finance climate-smart projects in the region. He has a master's degree in agroforestry, a master's in enterprise development, and a bachelor's degree in finance. He's originally from Chihuahua, Mexico. McKeon is ABC's Marine Program Director. He is a biodiversity scientist and natural historian focused on the conservation of marine ecosystems. An avid and enthusiastic conservationist and science communicator, C has participated in expeditions to remote reaches of the Atlantic, Pacific, and Indian Ocean basins, investigating the response of global diversity to environmental challenges. He holds a PhD in zoology from the University of Florida. EJ Williams is a vice president of the Southeast and Atlantic region. EJ is working to stop the decline of migratory birds and enable conservation throughout their life cycle. Previously, she served as an assistant regional director for migratory birds of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. EJ earned a bachelor's and master's degree in wildlife biology from the University of Florida, and she's a certified wildlife biologist and a graduate of the National Conservation Leadership Institute. Andrés is going to start things off now. Welcome, Andrés.
Hi, Jordan. Hi, everyone. Let me share my screen right here. And Jordan, if you can tell me if you can see my presentation, I would really appreciate that.
You're all set. Take it away.
All right, thanks. Hi, everyone. Yes, as Jordan mentioned, my name is Andrés Anchondo. I'm the Associate Director for Impact Investing in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I'm repeating this because you will see that all of my slides and photos are from Latin America and the Caribbean. That's where I work with our partners there. And I have seen a lot of examples on why birds are really cool and why they help benefit farmers, the planet, and all of us. So I would like to start with my favorite examples of why birds are really cool. The first one is they really help us inspire the future generations, and birds are a good way to show kids what wildlife looks like, right? Maybe they know about horses, but they never have seen a horse in their real life. But everyone has seen or heard of birds sometime at some point in their lives. The first 3 pictures I have in my slide are from a festival outside Washington, D.C. I volunteer with my local bird club, and we go out and we join festivals, and we always talk about birds with kids. We bring extra pairs of binoculars, and they're fascinated by birds. You know, on the East Coast, the easiest examples of birds that kids know are the cardinal, right? Or the blue jay. So it's always really fun to interact with kids and tell them about birds. Then I have this picture here. If you can see my arrow here. That one's from a festival in Honduras. We host bird festivals as a way to tell people about birds, teach kids about the importance of birds, particularly migratory birds, those bird species that we share. In the US and Canada, we have those tiny warblers during the summer, during spring and the summer. And then in South America, they have those beautiful birds during the fall and winter. The last photo on the right, it's a photo I took from one of my recent trips to Honduras, to La Mosquitia. And it was really nice to interact with those kids, particularly the one with the blue shirt, t-shirt, because we were telling them about why we work to conserve birds, to protect their habitat, to restore degraded lands. And just a few minutes after we were talking with the kids, we heard a chainsaw at the distance. And his immediate reaction was, oh no, birds are not gonna come anymore. So, like birds are a great tool to inspire people, especially kids. So my recommendation here would be, if you can join your local bird club, if you can teach a kid about birds, you will be inspiring someone to protect our planet. So that's my favorite way in which birds benefit us. Then the second one, I have a collection of pictures that one of my colleagues and myself took over some trips in Latin America. I have a few from Ecuador. It's really impressive to see the streets in Ecuador and see murals and graffiti with birds on them. The same is true for Honduras. It's just amazing to see how birds inspire people, coffee farmers, how people get inspired by in Honduras by their national bird, the scarlet macaw. So it's a source of inspiration, our birds, so they're worth conserving. The other way in which birds are benefiting people, when we work with our farmers in Latin America and the Caribbean, for example, with cacao farmers, they have their farm and we work with them to implement best management or best farming practices. If they have a cacao farm and they don't have a lot of shade, well, we help them plant shade trees that will provide shade to the cacao. And it's known that shade provides or creates better quality cacao. I mentioned the Mosquitia before in Honduras. So this is Honduras. So it's in the northeast part of Honduras, really remote area where we're working with amazing farmers growing delicious cacao. And we're partnering not just with the farmers, but also with companies that buy that cacao. They know that farmers there are taking care of the environment, that they care about birds, and they take that raw cacao once it's dried, and they transform it into chocolate bars. Chocolate bars that win prizes all over the world for their quality and good taste. So conserving birds can be an incentive for farmers to do the right thing for the planet, for their farms. So that's another great way in which birds are amazing. The next example is, well, birds are a great source of income for communities, for businesses. In the US, the birding industry, the bird watching industry generates $40 billion every year. To give you an example from Latin America, every year, tourists that visiting Colombia, the country with the most bird species in the world, they generate an income for that country for around $40 million. Every bird watcher spends on average $300 every year when they're visiting. So it's a great source of income for communities, for local guides, people who host the tourists. And I have a short video here, and let's see if it works. It's from one of our partners in Ecuador. They have a network of lodges to receive bird watchers. So if you are ever curious about visiting a place, Ecuador might be right. So I'm going to show you this 2-minute video, one of the reserves that we see. Oop. Sorry about that. Well, Great. So I wanted to share that video with all of you. It's really exciting to be visiting our partners, their lodges, and learning about all the great ways in which bird watchers engage in conservation. So your contributions when you're visiting lodges, when you're doing bird watching here in the US or in Latin America, impacts not just that company or that person who's hosting you, but it creates a lot of direct and indirect jobs, so improving people's livelihoods. The other great thing about birds and things I have seen with some of our conservation projects, for example, the first 4 pictures on the left is from a mangrove restoration project in northern Mexico. We know that mangroves are a great buffer for storms. When the tide is high, mangroves and their roots protect land, the shore. So what we are doing with our partners in northern Mexico, we're producing mangroves. We take the seeds from the mangrove trees and produce mangrove seedlings, and then we conduct reforestation projects. So each of those red circles is a mangrove tree. And we know that mangroves are not just a great place for birds to get protection, to feed, to get food, to rest, but also a great way of mitigating the impacts of climate change. Then on the right, I have a picture from a couple pictures from coffee farmers in Honduras. They are growing their coffee under the shade of trees. So this coffee is not only shade-grown coffee, it's also organic. And because they are organic and they are they have at least 10 different tree species, they have a high density of trees per acre, they can apply to the bird-friendly certification from the Smithsonian. And similar to the example I was giving you with cacao, these farmers can access markets in which they get paid more for their coffee. If you're interested in knowing more about bird-friendly coffee, visit that Smithsonian website for bird-friendly coffee. You will find great examples of companies selling this coffee. So yeah, those are ways that I know why birds are really amazing. I'm gonna leave it there, and I hope to hear your questions at the end, because I would like to chat with everyone. So back to you, Jordan.
Thanks so much, Andres. We're now going to hear from C, who's going to focus on marine birds and seabirds. So C, once you're ready, take it away.
Hi, Jordan.
Hi.
One moment and I will be ready to go. Sharing screen. All right. How are we looking?
It's loading. It says end of slideshow.
Oh, all right. That's odd. Sorry. Be right with you, folks. Okay, that looks good here. And trying again. Huh. How about now?
Perfect. Take it away.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that, folks. I'm going to be talking to you today about connections, and primarily connections with seabirds. And I'm going to make the point that connections between seabirds and humans are really our direct line to a connection with the ocean. Seabirds, as you know, are tremendously diverse. So it's a whole broad range of families, tremendous range of sizes as well. So it includes things like the least storm petrel that could hide comfortably in your closed fist, all the way up to the great albatrosses, which are almost half a human in height with a 12-foot wingspan. Massive birds. They're also champions of the bird world amongst seabirds. So the largest wingspan, the longest migration, the longest annual migration, the greatest pilots, the deepest divers, the broadest distributions are all held by seabirds. There's one other thing that they share though, and that's there's tremendous population decline. So we've lost we have a 70% decline in populations just in the last 60 years. Basically, seabirds are falling off the graph when it comes to populations. Part of the problem is not just the critically endangered species or species loss, but also numbers. So here's an idea. These are sooty shearwaters. And the current largest colony of sooty shearwaters that we know of is on a little island called Guafo off of the coast of Chile. And this island hosts about 4 million sooty shearwaters. Sounds like a lot of birds, but they're birds. How big of a deal could they be? Well, when I calculated out just the raw biomass of 4 million sooty shearwaters, it ended up being equal to at least 37 blue whales. This fleet of blue whales is the equivalent of our sooty shearwaters in just one colony. So if we're losing colonies, we're losing tremendous ecological and environmental impact. We're also losing species. Great auk is gone, Guadalupe storm petrel, Jamaica petrel, Olson's petrel, St. Helena's petrel, and probably more are already lost to us. We're trying to stop the decline. We need seabirds in our oceans. And so part of my motivation to talking to you today is telling you about why. And my first reason is that seabirds are ecosystem engineers. If you have eaten an organic vegetable today, chances are you have had an interaction with seabirds. At one point, seabird colonies were provided the nutrient richness enough to power empires. And this is literal. There have been wars over seabird resources. There have been territorial disputes. There are laws, massive laws put in place to manage seabird resources. And it all comes from birds like this. This is a guanay cormorant. And these cormorants, among many other seabirds, nest on islands. And they bring marine nutrients to these islands where they're deposited in the form of guano. In some cases, that guano deposits accumulates, so it builds, and it becomes an extractable resource for people and human agriculture. So if you happen to be growing things organically or purchasing organic vegetables, there's a good chance that you're already interacting with seabirds in an unknown way. This also has positive impacts for things like environmental restoration. And the idea started with poles in the Caribbean where pelicans and cormorants and terns would go to roost. Scientists noticed that underneath those poles, the seagrass was actually growing better. It was doing better because of the additional nutrients. So we began to manipulate systems so that we could utilize those nutrients and birds in environmental restoration. And the results have been amazing and diverse. One fantastic example is a small island in the Pacific where the reintroduction of native vegetation, the restoration of native forest, encouraged seabirds to breed. The bird nutrients, the bird-derived nutrients, so marine nutrients, made it to the coral reef and the nearshore waters where they created planktonic blooms. So the tiny little organisms that support a great deal of coral reef life increased. And that increase also was seen in the increase of things like manta rays. So we've got these multiple stops along a chain of impacts coming from seabirds and their connections to the ocean. Seabirds are also an indicator of ocean health. And they tell us about things like climate change, fisheries, and maybe most of all plastics. So this is the nest of a Galapagos cormorant, a Galapagos flightless cormorant. On the right-hand side, you can see the natural materials that were a part of this nest, and it's things like starfish and sea urchins, old feathers. And on the left, you can see the plastic content. It's disturbing how much plastic is currently in the ocean, and we see it time after time in seabirds. Sometimes it's mortal. Sometimes it kills them. So this is a juvenile albatross that was fed plastic by its parents, who gather floating debris on the surface of the ocean naturally because it often has flying fish eggs on it. Plastic might also have some flying fish eggs on it, but it is indigestible to seabirds, and they cannot regurgitate it. So the birds become impacted and die. So plastics are having a tremendous impact on our seabirds, and their mortality sadly tells us a great deal about the situation in the ocean. They also tell us about climate change and the movement of prey populations. So birds are bringing prey back to their nest to feed chicks. In some cases, climate change is actually promoting the movement of those prey species so that the fish are inappropriate to feed to chicks. So colony failure tells us about climate change, and it tells us about fishing. Human use of seabirds for fishing is booming. So this is a little article from Marlin magazine about using birds to find fish. Keen-eyed flyers can lead you to the promised land. This approach of using pelagic birds to find large game fishes like tunas and sailfish, marlins themselves, is so prevalent that the makers of radar systems for small boats are incorporating a bird mode so that recreational anglers can actually detect where the birds are and find them. This is not a new idea. The Polynesian and Micronesian navigators who mapped out the Pacific were largely following birds and other cues. So birds can tell people not only where there's fish, but also where there is land. They were astute observers, and they paid such attention to birds that it became part of their cultural. So seabirds connect people with the ocean, and in a very meaningful way. And it in part, it comes from perspective. So unlike a dolphin, unlike a sea turtle, unlike a shark, seabirds share the same perspective of the ocean that humans do, which is about 4 feet above the water, maybe going about 20 miles an hour. And that perspective is important. It allows us a view into that world that we don't get any other way. Sometimes we can get close even to flight, as in modern sailing using hydrofoils. We also see it in our culture and art. Anytime that you are looking at a drawing, a painting of the ocean, chances are that you're seeing seabirds. They're everywhere. They're part and parcel of the human perspective on oceans. And it goes so far as to reach into spirituality, myth, with many cultures having spiritual connections or finding spiritual connections between seabirds and their deities or the spirit world in general. This shows up in interesting places. This shows up in place names. Entire mountain ranges are named for this spiritual connection between seabirds and people. So the intent of the marine program is to change that trajectory, to change that graph that I showed you in the beginning, to make sure that seabirds that are numerous or that we think of as common now remain common, and also protect the most endangered, as Jordan pointed out in the beginning. Because when we lose seabirds, we lose not only ecosystem restoration tools and environmental monitoring, but also our connection with the ocean. So I'd like to say thank you very much. And I too am happy to take your questions during the question and answer session.
Thanks so much, C. We're gonna definitely talk to you at the Q&A, but next up is EJ. And EJ, as soon as you get ready, we're gonna go birds.
Yes, ma'am. Go birds. All right. So I do have a quick correction. Jordan gave my alma mater as the University of Florida, and it's the University of Georgia. And for anybody from the Southeast, you realize that's particularly important to distinguish that during football season. So just a quick correction. But let's continue this whole thought of just how marvelous birds are and what they do for us, and then think about what we can do for birds. So sort of continuing with this idea about, the services that birds provide, of course, they're pollinators. Almost everybody's probably got their own personal hummingbird during the summer, and, they provide this valuable service to pollinate so many of our flowers and plants. And they're also seed dispersers. And one of the most incredible examples is the relationship between whitebark pine, a western mountain pine species, and Clark's nutcrackers. Clark's nutcrackers get into the cones on the whitebark pines, extract the seeds, and then they cache or store the seeds in the ground. And they're storing them there to use all year round or in times, when food is short. And they never get back to all those seeds. And one Clark's nutcracker can cache over 100,000 seeds in a season. And so essentially every whitebark pine comes from a cached seed that a Clark's nutcracker planted. And we're concerned because whitebark pine has declined in large part because of pine beetles as well as some fungal diseases. And it's actually being considered as an endangered species. And so the only way we'll keep our Clark's nutcrackers may be to save the whitebark pines and vice versa. And so these relationships with seed dispersers are so important. And of course, The Very Hungry Caterpillar is a beloved children's book that mainly teaches children about nutrition, but think about the role that birds play in keeping those hungry caterpillars in check. Several years ago, some scientists in the Appalachians actually netted a portion of the forest such that insects could get in, but birds could not get in. And essentially, the forest was defoliated. And so you can't get too many, maybe butterflies and moths, but keeping the number of caterpillars in check is really important and a valuable thing that our birds do. And of course, I think everybody's heard the canary in a coal mine analogy. And I was actually shocked to learn that canaries were actually used to warn miners of toxic levels of carbon monoxide into the mid-1980s. And then we developed some, non-bird-based ways to detect those poisonous gases. But the reason birds were used is they're so sensitive to air quality that they actually would start to feel bad and show signs in time to give the miners time to get out of the part of the mine that had this toxic gas. They did have protocols for reviving the little canaries that encountered bad gas. I don't know how successful they were, but fortunately now that's mostly an expression that we use to think about environmental issues. And of course, it makes its way into various political cartoons. But the canary in the coal mine is a good thing to keep in mind in terms of what birds tell us about our world and if it's safe for us. So continuing on that idea, water quality. Birds can tell us so much about water quality. This little Louisiana water thrush nests along the side of fast-moving streams, and they depend on the invertebrates in those streams. So when I hear a Louisiana water thrush, I know that that stream has high water quality, enough to support a Louisiana water thrush and the invertebrates it needs. And of course, sea level is top of mind in terms of one of our, serious environmental threats. And one of the species that tells us so much about sea level rise is the black rail. This is a tiny little sparrow-sized rail with little bitty short legs. And sea level rise is really taking a toll. In just the past decade, their range has essentially collapsed. And so we no longer have black rails nesting in New England, in the mid-Atlantic, and we've got isolated populations in North and South Carolina and Florida. So we're working with a number of partners to try and build around those existing populations and expand the black rails. But they're just saying so much in terms of warning about sea level rise. And of course, healthy marshes. And if we don't have healthy marshes, guess what else we don't have? We don't have seafood. That's the nursery for so many fish and shrimp. And we don't have those buffers against storm surge. So we got to listen to what the black rails are telling us about sea level rise and the health of our marshes. Birds can tell us a lot about the condition of different systems. You know, birds are part of every ecosystem, and we know a lot about birds and their habitat relationships. So we know a lot about a forest, for instance, based on the birds that are there. Swallowtail kites are an apex predator in many of our southeastern forests. And so if we've got a swallowtail kite nesting successfully, that tells me that we've got big trees for their nests, and we've got a really diverse landscape that's providing a lot of insects, frogs, snakes, and baby birds that are what the kites feed on and feed their young. So they tell us a lot about the health of the forest. And of course, migratory birds can also tell us about the health of our whole hemisphere-wide system of breeding habitats, stopovers for migration, as well as layering habitats. And so those ecological, biological, ecosystem services, those are so critically important. But I don't want us to lose sight of just the joy that birds bring us. And many of us are fortunate enough to work with birds or to chase birds a lot. And we tend to get really wrapped up about the rare things or the hard to find species. But always remember the joy of just those backyard birds like a northern cardinal or a house wren, or maybe that great blue heron that sails in and lands in a little wetland in your neighborhood. And, you know, birds fascinate us with their incredible journeys, their feathers, all the different lifestyles they have and the complexities. But we always have to keep in mind, too, just how inspiring bird song is, just like the song of this wood thrush. For me, that's the essence of spring. And it's also been one of the most inspirational aspects of our work, all of our work, to save our natural world. So remember, Rachel Carson in 1962 published Silent Spring. And of course, this was a book all about the dangers of chemicals and how we needed to get control over our just, you know, ubiquitous use of chemicals that were weakening bird eggshells, outright killing wildlife. But you notice Rachel did not title her bird The Dangers of DDT or How Chemicals Are Harmful. She titled it Silent Spring. And just that prospect or possibility of a world without birdsong, that started our entire grassroots environmental movement. And so the power of birdsong is not to be underestimated. I would argue that birds are, and yes, C talked about this, Andrés talked about this, there's such an awesome connection and a way to connect people of all different backgrounds to nature and to the natural world. And so, of course, we want you to help us save birds and do things for birds. But what I hope is that in 50 years, the headline in the New York Times or the Washington Post is that birds save the world. And so thank y'all for joining us and helping us save the birds so they can save us.
Thanks, EJ. I can't get over that piping plover chick picture. It's so cute. And it's such a great picture to end on because again, it is that emotional aspect of birds, whether it gets you feeling all warm and fuzzy like that chick, or just really fired up to keep advocating to help these birds. So for our audience, if you feel inspired and want to share why you care about birds, or maybe even want to donate, if you could go to becausebirds.org, we would really appreciate it. But we're going to move into the Q&A portion right now. So if Andres and C could come back on camera, we'll take some of these questions and just talk about how amazing birds are. But before we get into the super fun stuff, I do want to not lose the train of thought that EJ really shared in her presentation. And let's talk about some other ways that people can actually take action. How can people jump in and support birds? So Andres, I saw you in the chat talking about some of the things. Do you want to start off and answer with some of your top tips on how to help birds?
Yes, I had a really interesting question on the chat, and it's about, can we buy mainstream coffee that benefit birds? It's true that a lot of big companies are trying to make their coffee production, their coffee farming practices more sustainable, and they're doing a really good job. But unfortunately, sometimes all of that coffee gets mixed up with other coffee with unsustainable practices. So I know it's expensive to buy bird-friendly certified coffee, but it's important to remember that that premium that we are paying is going directly to the farmers that are doing really good work and going above and beyond the traditional farming practices. Just when we're visiting the farmers and seeing that they really care about what they are doing and they're connected to the birds, like they can definitely tell. Like farmers, they're not bird watchers, you know, but they can tell that their farms get way more birds than their neighbors, you know, that they have cattle pastures and they have a few cows in there, so they can really tell. And again, it's doing supporting bird-friendly practices, even if they are not certified. It's always a great incentive to do the right thing. So yes.
Thanks, Andres. C, what are some of your top tips to help birds? And I'll add in, maybe you can talk about plastics a little bit more too.
Okay. Well, there's certainly a lot of ways that marine birds could be aided by you. I'm a big believer in the idea of voting with your dollar. So if you think of every dollar as a vote, you have choices. And a lot of them are products, like Andres was just talking about. Donations to organizations such as our own are a great use of your voting dollars. But knowing where your purchases are coming from can make a big impact for birds. And it doesn't matter what your bird of interest is, you will be able to find a way to influence their habitat, their well-being with your choices. When it comes to plastic, a similar approach can apply, which is mindfulness of your home use of plastics, disposable plastics, where they end up. Where do they go? What is the chain that's involved with your personal consumption of plastic? Having that understanding will aid us a lot in controlling the abundance of plastic in the oceans. I will add one more thing for seabirds in particular, and that's your willingness to share stories, your willingness to talk about birds, about the joy that you experience while watching birds. If you're a fisherman, have you been helped to find fish by birds? Tell that story. The more stories that we have out there as far as bird positive news, people interacting with birds, making sure that they have front seat for all of these conservation issues, it really does help.
Who doesn't love talking about birds? I'm so with you, C. EJ, what are some of your top tips?
Well, I love the things that Andres and C offered. And I would just, have a bird-friendly life. There's so many choices we make every day. If you've got a cat, keep it indoors. If you've got windows where birds hit, put some tape up, or, there's a bunch of different ways, and we've got information on how to not have windows that kill birds. I love C's idea about talk to people. Talk to your neighbors, make sure you've got a bird feeder out and that you take good care of it. And people can see how fun it is to have a yard full of goldfinches. And then you've got a way to talk to them about, your cat, could you maybe keep it indoors? It'd be better for the cat. And then you've also got that chance to talk about, wow, I had the best bird-friendly coffee this morning. Have you tried bird-friendly coffee? So that, neighbor to neighbor discussion. And so I think a bird-friendly life. And then the other thing, I know we have some people on this webinar that have just mad bird skills. So donate your time and skills, whether it's a Christmas bird count or get involved with a local bird club or your local university that's doing research, volunteers that can really help us track what's going on with birds. It's critically important, and it's a big part of our understanding of what's going on with birds is what our, community scientists can tell us. So go out there and take advantage of all that time you've invested to learn your birds.
Absolutely. And in case our audience is feeling overwhelmed, you've given us so many tips. There's so much to do. Start with one. There really is something for everyone when it comes to helping birds, whether you're honestly 5 years old or 85 years old, whether you have no money or $1 million, you can find something that actually works for you and helps birds at the same time, because it's better to start and do something than do nothing. So again, we have tons of options and ideas and resources on our website at abcbirds.org. And I really encourage all of you to find what works for you and then keep building, keep trying something new. So next, we're going to talk about what's something that you always tell people about birds. We just were talking about all of the sharing, and I'll admit one of the best things about birds is that connection, both with the birds, but also with people. There's just nothing better than getting to share birds with other people. And then maybe you have some, coffee and donuts or just, good food and drink. But there's nothing better than that for me, at least. So Andres, what's something that you make sure to tell people about birds?
That's a great question. When I'm visiting our projects in Latin America, I always tell them about migratory birds, right? That's the program I work on. And I tell them how we share birds, like North America and Central and South America, we share birds. Like a lot of our birds here in the US migrate to South America and Central America and the Caribbean. And I have a great story. When we were visiting one of our projects, I don't know, I talk a lot about the Honduras project because I like it so much, but we were talking to cacao farmers and we were telling them about migratory birds. And we had some swallows flying. And one of the farmers said, like, I think the swallows are migratory because they are not here year round, like he didn't know that was bird migration. But immediately when I told them the story about how they moved to spend the winter in Central America and then they come back to North America in spring to breed, he immediately made that connection, like, oh, they're only here in the winter, during the winter time, and then they go back. So I love to talk about people, how it's not yours or mine birds, it's not North America's birds, like everyone's birds, like, like they spend a pretty good amount of time here in North America and in half of the year outside North America. So it's always nice to tell that story and how we're connected.
That's awesome, Andres. How about you, C? What's something that you always tell people about birds?
Well, like you, I'm a big proponent of talking about birds, and in particular seabirds, because unlike most of our land birds, not all, but most of our land birds have benefited from a cheering crowd of home bird watchers with bird feeders. Seabirds don't have that. The majority of our population has not and probably will not ever go out to the open ocean to see many of these species. That said, they are having an impact on your life. So I try to bring that point home like I did today, but I also directly address there's something like EJ was saying that supersedes, that goes beyond an intellectual connection or the ability to watch or the interest in watching birds. There's an emotional connection there too for most people. Birds are evocative of feelings like freedom. The idea of flight is powerful for people. And so when I'm trying to connect with other marine audiences, such as surfers and sailors and mariners of all stripes, I'm thinking about what is it that about the ocean that makes you feel like a marine person? What is it that draws you? Chances are you share that perspective and that sensation with watching marine birds as well. So that's where I go with it.
That's awesome. How about you, EJ?
Well, I'm lucky. Most of the birds I work with are land birds, so they do tend to have a audience and a cheering section. And what I usually try to do is kind of take advantage of where I am and foster that connection. And, so if it's a hummingbird, I'm with Andrés, it's just magic that a bird that weighs less than, what it takes to mail a first class, it weighs less than an ounce, can fly nonstop across the Gulf of Mexico. People can't believe that they can watch that little hummingbird at their feeder and then think about it making that nonstop flight. Or, I just try and talk to them about whatever birds I'm hearing and help them hear that so they know, you don't always have to see it. You can hear things. And so I'm usually trying to help people kind of make that connection. And I get to work with a lot of forest landowners in particular. And they're amazing stewards of their land, and that quite often they have, a family legacy, and the property may have been in their family for generations, and yet they don't know the birds that use their property. And a lot of times they're not interested in knowing all the birds and being able to identify them, but to stand in the middle of the forest and say, okay, I can hear an orchard oriole and a red-eyed vireo. Oh, and there was a yellow-billed cuckoo, and oh, there's a white-eyed vireo. Almost invariably, the reaction is, I had no idea my forest provided for all those birds, and they love that. So I try and make it personal for people and something they can relate to.
Absolutely. I'll share that I like all of the amazing things that birds do and are. So I share lots of really ridiculous facts because I can't help it. And I've told people about woodpecker tongues and how their tongues wrap around their brains probably 1,000 times, and it still makes me kind of giddy. So I'm with you. But I have to be a downer because while birds are so amazing and give us so much joy, it's also a really challenging time right now. Our world is hurting. Conservation has a lot of struggles. So one of the questions that someone asked was, how do we stay motivated? How do you deal with something that's called environmental grief? Because this does take such a long time sometimes to see that progress and, just have wins, even if they're small. So how do you stay motivated? Is it just that you focus on how cool birds are, or is there something else? So Andrés, how do you stay positive when it comes to birds?
Yeah, it's always tough. It's a tough job to see the impact we humans are having in the environment on bird habitat. But every time I visit our projects, every time I chat with farmers that care about the environment, care about birds, that really inspires me, and that tells me that we need to keep moving forward. We need to keep working with them. It's not easy, but we need to keep doing that. I also would like to share, because we have a lot of questions about cacao and coffee. The Smithsonian, we have been working with the Smithsonian, and pretty soon we're gonna have bird-friendly cacao. That cacao is gonna be used to produce chocolate. So just keep your eyes open, because we will be telling you more about that pretty soon.
Awesome. How about you, C?
I also struggle with it. I think that it's a very real issue, particularly in the face of extinction, and this moment as you describe it. But I come back to the feelings that I get from birds that make the conservation of marine birds in particular worthwhile. And that's just like I was saying before, it's about flight over the open ocean. It's about a sensation of movement, progress forward. It's about freedom, the freedom to range the globe, to go where you want, and providing that to others. So I take refuge in those feelings and my ability to make some small bit of difference.
Which is really powerful too. EJ,
Mhm.
you say go birds all the time. You are one of the biggest cheerleaders for birds. How do you deal?
I walk almost every morning for about an hour in nature. And so I try and either get to the shore or in a forest, and if I can start every day with that connection to nature, you will never see me with earbuds on my walk, because I want to listen. I want to hear the birds. I want to experience, even if it's just the squirrels. So putting myself in nature is how I start the day. And then, I focus on the places where we can make a difference, similar to what C said and Andrés, working with these amazing private forest landowners, working with state and federal agencies that are committed to making a difference for birds, and just looking for where can we make a difference, and let's make the biggest difference possible, in those places where we can really, really work, and where are those opportunities to take, projects that build up to landscape level, gains, because, we always work at a project scale, and we've got the ability to bring projects together across big landscapes so that it really does influence populations. And so, that's focusing on those places where we can make such a difference.
Absolutely. I mean, you really are making me think about all of the success that waterfowl have actually had. Waterfowl have had incredible population growth. And that to me indicates that when you actually invest and put backing into conservation, we can be successful. All of these challenges right now, they're not wake-up calls, they're rallying calls. Now's the time when we can come together, both birds and people, and actually do something and do better. So I really appreciate all three of you, what you've shared in your presentations and during the Q&A. Unfortunately, our time with the webinar is quickly coming to a close. We only have one more question left before we have to end. But again, if you feel inspired, audience, please go to becausebirds.org and share why you care about birds. We want to know what you have to say. So our last question is, what is one thing that you hope everyone takes away from this webinar and goes and tells a friend? And we're going to go in order of the presenters. So Andrés, you're up.
Join your local bird club. Go out, bird watch, welcome everyone. Bird watching is one of those activities that everyone can join, So welcome everyone into the bird watching, bird conservation world.
And C?
I would say marine birds are already affecting your life, and we welcome you. Come to the ocean, check them out, learn about them.
And EJ?
I'm going to follow your lead, Jordan. Do one thing, don't be overwhelmed. Start somewhere and do one thing for your birds, and then make your birds your neighbor's birds. Talk to people about birds.
And on that amazing note, we're gonna now end the webinar. Thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you so much to our audience for joining us. We at ABC truly couldn't do our work and help birds without your support. So thank you and good birding.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.